Welcome one, welcome all to another developer interview here on the Xbox Expansion Pass. Today, I am joined by Thierry Boulanger of Sabotage Studios to talk about his upcoming turn-based RPG, Sea of Stars, set to come out this August. I'm your host, Luke Lohr, the Insipid Ghost. Thierry, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. We haven't chatted in a few years, so this should be fun.
Yeah, you were last on XEP 40 when we were still doing joint episodes with interviews, and that was in July 2020.
Yeah. Oh wow.
That's when you put it like that, it's like, whoa.
Oh yeah.
Whoa. We talked all about the messenger then. We knew a project was coming. Didn't know what. And here you are, man. Here you are.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you so much. It was a fun chat last time, and I've been looking forward to this one as well.
Yeah, well, I'm stoked to get into it. Sea of Stars, of course, catching a lot of attention. You guys have an announced release date in August, which certainly has to feel cool. Do you feel a new sense of pressure now that like everything's getting locked in?
Kind of, yeah. Well, I mean, it's because we've been working on this for like 4.5 years, right? And it's kind of like this moment of kind of having to let go, because it felt for so long that we would just be working on this forever, which has been an absolute treat. And yeah, we're getting closer to this reality that is going to be in the player's hands now, and they'll be looking at every single detail, lifting every stone. I mean, we're happy with it, but I don't think we're there yet emotionally, most of the team, that this will be out of our hands, soon. We still have a few months left though, but we're trying to start to process that as we go.
I see. How many people are on the team?
Right now we're totaling 26 people, including outside. We had a guest composer. Some people are not at the office directly, like our composer Eric is he's also a touring musician. So he's in Colorado, whereas we're in Quebec, Canada, and so not everyone has a seat at the studio. But yeah, 26 people total are working on this. And to add to that, there's also another team, another studio in Quebec, who they do our cinematics for the game. We have like fully rendered, full screen, traditionally animated 2D hand-drawn animations for some key beats in the story. That's done by a separate studio as well. So that's around 15 more people. So yeah, a lot of people, a lot of talent gathered around this idea. So it's been a journey.
Is it tough to balance, that many people in different settings? I mean, if you're full remote, obviously that's one thing, but to be partially remote, is that difficult?
It's working out. I mean, it's of course the whole lockdown hit, as we kicked off our Kickstarter, and so we've kind of had to adjust to that as we entered production. And so basically now it's that was all pre-ironed out, how to be productive, how to check in daily, how to still get over not feeling like doing our hours because we're just home all the time. And so everyone now has a healthy balance of how much they want to be at their desk versus like staying home. So no, we've got it pretty locked in now, the entire process. So no, it's pretty good. And, by nature, I mean, we all check in our assets to a shared server anyway. So even if we're on site, there's always still a remote component, even in-house, into how assets are handled. So yeah, it's we have this Slack thing that everyone seems to be using nowadays for like just team chat, and it's super efficient. So we have channels for all the topics and all the little sub themes that we broke ourselves into on different subjects that we're working on, and chats are just happening, and no, it's great.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I know our last chat several years ago was about the messenger, and Sea of Stars is set in this world, but it's a prequel by a significant margin, yes?
Oh yeah. Very long time prior to the messenger, actually. So messenger was like a post-apocalyptic setting where there essentially had been a flood, and there was only the one island left, essentially, and it was cursed. And so you were playing this ninja that had to traverse that island carrying a scroll to deliver the message to the mountain at the end. And so now we're before that flood. So it's set in an archipelago, which is, it was more of a narrative thing at first. But as we entered level design and world design, that's a pretty good hack, actually, to have an archipelago, because having a ship sailing around, everything is kind of like by default more self-contained. You can more easily have clear themes, that are kind of more singled out that you explore. You just duck somewhere, you explore a little bit, you go somewhere else, and so yeah, it's in the same world, but yeah, before some major events.
Where did this idea come from? Like to have a shared world, post-apocalyptic, to the
Uh,
mountain top. That's a
oh
lot.
man, I see. That's one that I understand the question, but I don't really know what to do with it because it was always that for me. So
Hmm.
I've been building this fantasy world since I was in elementary school,
Hmm.
and basically, so Sabotage was like, well, I want to tell the big arcs of that thing that's always been living in my mind, and so the shared universe thing wasn't like, oh, Messenger worked out, let's be in that world again. It was kind of always that, right? We told
Hmm.
that story, which was easier to tell with a smaller team, and as a startup it's not as risky of a proposition. You know what I mean? It's like I jumped, therefore I am, and so it's not, will you trust us with all these big systems that a turn-based RPG
Hmm.
comes with. And so now with more means and with a bigger team and then with a bit of a name to ourselves, we kind of undertook something bigger. But it was always in the same world, and the gameplay has to be in tune with the story that we're telling, which this time around it's about a group of travelers and not a single one traversing a single island.
The cool part to me when I look at kind of the Messenger and Sea of Thieves, Sea of Thieves, Sea of Stars. Sorry,
Happens all
uh,
the time.
does it really?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh man.
Because it's very top of mind, sea of, and then we've said it so many times that I mean, yeah.
Oh, so you're a good guest. You let me off the hook, and I appreciate that.
Oh, but I mean, for sure, yeah, and that genuinely happens all the time, so that's fine.
Well, thank you. There's a big departure in gameplay style. You have the Metroidvania run,
Hmm.
jump, throw things, sword,
Hmm.
to turn-based RPG. That is a
Yeah.
big transition, and for the story to have always been in your mind, were the gameplay mechanics always in your mind for Sea of Stars to be this, Messenger to be that?
All right. Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, of course, you enter the design process, and that's when you fully, close in on what it's actually going to be. But for me, wanting to do the project in the first place comes from, are there enough either known irritants or areas that can be made lighter or presented in more of a fresh way
Hmm.
that kind of not justifies, but that kind of make it interesting, I suppose, to
Hmm.
undertake. Like, let's not just do one more redoing the same things. Can we rethink enough? How do we? It's a bit of a pruning process, if you will. That like that didn't age well. Let's leave that aside. Oh, that could have been done like that. Let's address it.
Hmm.
And for me, it just comes from a feeling like that. Yes, there is enough to present like a worthwhile new entry, kind of. Um, and so yeah, for Sea of Stars, the idea of, for me, like playing, and I'm thinking of all the way to Xbox when I played Lost Odyssey, right? Which is about, for me at least personally, probably the last one where it was like an RPG release that I was hoping for, that turn-based, that where everything clicks for me.
Hmm.
But since playing Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG back in the day, I always kept hoping with every JRPG release,
Hmm.
is it gonna be the one that has both the timing of the hits and the battle taking place in the same area that you're traversing?
Hmm.
And so, and that thing just kind of never came out.
Right.
Or maybe it's out there and I just haven't seen it. But and so for Sea of Stars, the core of that mechanic was the core of that dynamic of traversing in a lighter way like Chrono Trigger, but having more active turn-based combat like Super Mario RPG put
Hmm.
together. And then extrapolating on that, how do you make the rest of the game feel in tune with those ideas? Uh, was kind of the thread to follow, where yeah, there seems to be a lot to do there that hasn't necessarily been done exactly like that, even though a lot of it is familiar because we know who we're making this for, right?
Right. So you're mentioning the combat, and a lot of people wrote in asking your inspirations for the game.
Oh
You
yeah.
mentioned Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, and then Ellery, our friend Ellery, asked us. Uh, they want to know about the combat style specifically, and if it evolved from another game. So I'm wondering if those questions aren't kind of all encompassing. Is it
Uh-huh.
inspiration and mimicry? or evolution?
Hmm. A big part of it is definitely homage, right? But from there, we also evolve into there's essentially it's there's a lot of friction that can be removed would be my observation from the get-go before undertaking like, okay, let's figure all of this and how the systems are going to play out and interact. And essentially whenever there is friction, it's like, how do we remove it and balance um, uh, in a way that resonates with that. So for example, so MP in the game is, so here's another, like, maybe it's a more high level thing, but for me, one irritant that I had in the list was uh, I'm never using magic in regular encounters as I'm running a dungeon,
Mm-hmm.
only to do nothing but once I'm at the boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so combat is kind of like, it has all this variety. I've got all these spells that I can use, but it's always, no, there's only that one that's optimal damage right now. So
Mm-hmm.
you just do that one while chugging ether that you always keep saving for later if it's a regular fight.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to create a dance where, without telling the player like you are forced to use this, otherwise you fail, just that everywhere have more incentive to do things that bring variety to what you see happening on the screen. So one example is MP. The MP cap is really low. Um, let's take, for example, 12, right, on your character. And then doing a big, we call it the sunball from the sun character. It's essentially the equivalent of a fireball. It costs 8, right? So after you do it once, you're left at 4. So you can't just spam it. But also doing a regular attack regenerates 3 MP to your character.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of creates this dynamic where if you're in a regular fight and you're full of MP and you're just attacking, you're gonna get this feeling that I'm wasting regeneration. So I'm gonna use a special skill even though it's not a boss, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And then when you're out of options and you attack, you still get something out of it. So it doesn't feel like you're missing out essentially ever. And then when you're on a boss, you can't be spamming that fireball either, right? Because once you've used it, you're out. You can't like do 7 and then you use an item. You would need an item every time you use it. So it's making you develop a pacing between attacking and using special skills. And on top of that, there are please stop me if I'm getting too
No, I'm enjoying. This is good.
okay. So on top of that, there's a locks mechanic. So enemies that are mounting spells or skills that deal more damage, they will display locks, and locks are basically damage types. They're of the 6 damage types that you can do in the game once you have the
Mm-hmm.
full party. And there's also a timer and how many player actions that thing will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're using your attacks, you're trying to break those locks. So it's not only about what's my strongest attack and I'll just be spamming that. So I want to break the spell, because if I break all the locks, I cancel the enemy's action.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't manage to fully break it, the ensuing damage is still reduced by the percentage of the locks that I removed. So if there are 4 and I manage to remove 3 and then it flies, then it's at 25% efficiency. And if I remove all of them, then it's canceled entirely. So there's also this dynamic where your skills and your spells, they're not only how much damage they do, it's what pattern they attack in, what damage types do they do, and how many hits is that, including if I pull off like timing my hits. And so part of what's keeping it fresh is you're being presented with randomized luck patterns that kind of challenge you. Oh yeah, if I can bounce this thing 5 times, I'll be able to remove that. If I spend on this, I'll be able to take half of that away, but I need to deal with that one is going to hit me. And so there's that strategy layer, and it being fully turn-based, meaning there's no time bars, right? When it's your turn, you just take all the time you want. You
Mm-hmm.
can swap between your characters. You get 6 totals, but you only have 3 in battle.
Mm-hmm.
Cut swapping for one that's not in the fight is has no cost. You can act right away. You can
Okay.
change your mind. There's no cost at all. You're not wasting a turn. And so when you're playing the strategy side of it, you're really just taking your time and trying to read the pattern, and you get an understanding of how you can execute. And so the kits on the character are kept very small. Each character has 3 skills and 1 ultimate that comes in later. But those 3 skills, they're not only about how much damage they do, they're really about the patterns, the damage types, and the amount of hits. And then that combines into there's around 25 combo attacks that you get in the game. So as
Mm-hmm.
you're breaking locks, as you're making actions, you're earning a kind of energy that builds into combo points
Mm-hmm.
that lets you combine attack between your characters, and you can kind of extrapolate because the kits are small. Like, oh, this is AOE Moon and this is single target Sun. If they do something together, it will probably be AOE Sun and Moon or something like that. And you
Hmm.
can kind of, and they all kind of make sense, you know. And also, the combo points that you build up are the only cost of doing a combo attack. It doesn't cost MP at all. So it's not a thing where you build towards that, and because it's better, you start doing only that or whatever. And they're also lost after battle. So whenever you get these points, you'll be showing off. You'll be spending them. There's no saving for later, and so all of that creates a kind of synergy where you're playing the Lux mechanic, you're playing and then you're pulling off some cooler combos that do more damage. And so there's this building up and then cashing in. You know, your kind of your preparation, and it really brings a sense of a more dynamic to the boss fights, where instead of like let's repeat this turn and use a potion every 3 turns, it's more like let's build up for 3 turns and then have that magical round on round 4 where we just cash in everything we built up, and then we start again, and you do that a couple of times, and it feels like you should win at that point or something, you know.
This world was in your mind since elementary school. Was all that? Like, did you have like that in mind, like the core principle there? Because you just described a lot of really interesting combat mechanics.
Mm.
Was that always yours, or did that
It
change
was
over
a
time?
slow build, meaning. So, you know, for example, a lot of it is inspiration, right? It's from inspiration. So, for example, playing Chrono Trigger, right? I'm like, oh man, I love doing the combo attacks. It looks really cool to see my characters act at the same time, but it kind of sucks that they're both spending a turn and that they're also both spending the same MP as if they were acting on their own. So it's like, let's just make that little adjustment that just feels empowering instead of being a drag, or you figuring out, well, then I'll never use my solo skill because, you know, I'll just do the combos because it's better. And I wanted to make something by separating the currencies, if you will, or the energy types of
Hmm.
the actions that you do. It kind of isolates them instead of like, well, if spending on a combo is more damage to MP than doing a single actor skill, I'll never use any ever again once I unlock this. And so
Hmm.
it's keeping everything relevant, you know, throughout the game. So that was always sort of like noticing these little things that could be done differently. Yeah, was sort of the process. But then obviously it all becomes a concrete design once you really get down to it.
You've talked about inspirations a lot, and I'm curious. Captain Logan wrote in and wanted to know uh, if they're not into traditional RPGs, like the 16-bit era RPGs. Uh, are they still set to enjoy Sea of Stars? Is that still something they would be able to get into?
Huh. I mean, yeah. Well, so if you can't do turn-based combat, you know what I mean? It's like some people they just, you know,
Doesn't click. Yeah.
like for me, you know, like I love all video games, but if I have a hand of cards, I can't do it. You know,
Right.
for some I just can't. I don't. I'm unable to interact with that. I don't want to build a deck. I don't want to spend a card. I just
Right.
can't. And so if you have like a hard blocker on the combat being turn based,
Hmm.
I don't think there is much, you know,
Yeah.
we can do for you. Meaning like it is absolutely, you know, you move around, you see the enemies, you touch them, everyone gets into place.
Hmm.
You know, battle dance starts looping, music kicks up, and then you're picking your action from a menu.
Hmm.
That is for sure like what the game is.
Hmm.
But other than that, if the reason why you tend to dislike those games is some of the tedium
Hmm.
that you see associated with it, for sure the bulk of our efforts went into doing away with as much of that as possible. Like a pet peeve of mine is I'm trying to find my way in a dungeon,
Hmm.
combat starts, I'm in a different angle for the combat, and then I'm out of combat. It's like, was I going left or right? And I end up back
Right.
at the dungeon's entrance, you know? And so all these things of it always being connected, because combat doesn't warp you to a battlefield. Everything happens in the scene that you're traversing.
Hmm.
And we put a lot of the platformer expertise to work as well. We wanted to break free from the grid, right? The tile
Hmm.
based movement. It's like You just walk up to a ledge, you can jump down. You walk up to a climbable surface, you grab on and you start climbing. You can
Right.
hoist up, grab the ledge, and water is in and out seamlessly. You're not like loading another state where you lose control while your character enters the water. You just jump in, walk out. And so that seamless, like the traversal outside of combat feels more like an action game, right? Our thing was a world you can touch, meaning if it looks like you can go there, just try and you'll be able to. There's verticality to the gameplay that I think is rarely seen in the genre. So we're certainly happy with that as well.
Gotcha. Well, friend of the show, Baron, wrote in and was talking about that grid-based design. He says, when developing Sea of Stars, was grid-based combat similar to like Disgaea, XCOM? Was that a potential option for you guys? Or was that part of the tedium that you wanted to take away?
Right, right. Well, so yeah, I think for me, especially to the example that they're referring to, I think that would take it closer to, I think what we would consider like more of a tactical RPG than perhaps a turn-based one. Like in terms of rhythm, enemies they bring pacing, a little bit of action, but it's really more about the exploration, right? You'll usually kill regular monsters in 2 or 3 hits if you're where you're supposed to be with the gear that you're supposed to be wearing. Um, and that there's a bit of without getting like tactical per se about the gameplay, there's still a bit of displacement gameplay. For example, you can have a character that grabs an enemy and throws it close to another one, meaning that your sunball that we were talking about has splash damage, right? So it's like a localized area of effect. And so if two enemies are far apart, you can only hit one of the two. But if first you throw one next to it, then you can hit both with that one skill. So there is some of that going on where enemy placement kind of plays a role with some of your skills. You get more for your buck, by using those in those scenarios, and you can displace some enemies a little bit, but it's not a core part of the, like, you don't move your own characters around and things like that. There's no like back attack or whatever.
Hmm. That makes sense. Another listener, Kevin. A lot of people wrote in, by the way. They were all excited and
Great,
chit-chatting.
awesome.
Yeah, I thought so too, man. Our buddy Kevin Ainsworth wrote in, and I think you partially answered this. He said, Sea of Stars is marketed as a retro-inspired RPG. Has it been hard balancing retro style with modern quality of life features? Uh,
Hmm.
and then is curious, are there any features that you wanted to implement but didn't or couldn't?
Didn't or couldn't? The answer is no. I think no. I think everything. I mean, we've been blessed throughout this production, and of course that's a testament to the team's talent. But no, everything really, like, no matter which stupid idea I came up with, people just, okay, let's figure this out, and it panned out really well. One being the dynamic lighting that we have in the game. Um, but so in terms of retroness, it's and I remember we talked about this, but it's when you think about retro games, and most of what you miss is being nine, right? And then having your big shirt over your knees, and a controller inside with your arms inside your sleeves. It's not unfair difficulty, repetitive music, stiff controls. That's not the part that you miss. And so where we're trying to be is for the game to be as good as your memory of those games. But if it was literally like those games, I don't think that's something most people would care to play today as a fresh title. You can still replay your classics because you fill in the blanks with your nostalgia, and then that's still fun. But if you play something that you have to try to love now, and it has all these, things that should be ironed out. So that's where we're trying to be, and it's kind of, we're having this connection. We're kind of carrying how the game should feel, right? And as we play, as we test mechanics, we're like, oh, is that going too far? Is it cutting the thread now? Did I just lose my immersion? And then we walk it back. So that has happened a little bit as we were trying to kind of map what feels right and what makes sense. But so one example that I could use, but it's actually from Messenger, is so on NES, right? If you had too many sprites in the same scan lines, they would start blinking, right? Because they would take turns rendering.
Yeah.
So we chose not to implement that glitch, but we still made a deliberate decision never to have more than 4 enemies on the screen at the time. I think we cheated once or twice,
This is
but
in mess.
so in the messengers, sorry, yeah, in the platformer that was more NES inspired. And the idea behind that was, well, no one would say like, oh, there's 14 enemies on the screen. That doesn't feel retro. They would just subconsciously, without really being able to tell why, feel like they're kind of losing the connection a little bit because these are not things that we necessarily consciously notice. And so we're trying to have, and that's what we refer to as game feel, right? Which is very abstract, but still, it's not necessarily in the things that you notice. It's just in how it sings in general. We're trying to keep those retro limitations in mind for the game to do the kind of things that these games were doing. For example, I mean, we can animate. We have infinite, space on the disc, compared to old games. But we're still deliberately, if someone is startled, right, instead of doing like a startle frame fully animated,
Right.
we'll just take the sprite and do a little jump. It's not that we can't animate it or that we can't afford to have that as extra in the assets. It's just that what a great opportunity to just make that feel right and call back to what you know. So it's a lot of those decisions, like moment to moment throughout the game, what feels retro, what's modern enough. And so we're modernizing more in terms of how we tell the story and how we remove friction from the gameplay mechanic. But
Mm-hmm.
with all things aesthetics, we tend to be more retro, where the modernized part is more in the design.
What is it about the 16-bit era that speaks to you so much? Is it because you were a kid then, or is there more to it?
I was a kid then, for sure, and it's wow, straight to the soul. I'm not sure, man. What is it about it? I think that I like a game. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love next gen titles as much as everything, but I also still love retro games as much as modern ones. And for me, I don't know. They just carried some. There was something through the simplicity of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like one example for me would be music in games where they've got so many means. Now everyone has an orchestra now, and everyone can do like a 12-minute tracks for any moment. And it seems to me like you play a game and it's always just like slow swells, and probably that to the musician's ear, that's like way more produced. That's way more, intelligent musically, and it builds into something that, if you get it,
Mm-hmm.
is possibly better than a 16-bit soundtrack. But to me, there's just something about, hey, look, you have a 1-minute loop here. So
Mm-hmm.
you gotta have a hook. Right? It has to be good now. We're not building up towards nothing here because it will be looping by the time you're done with your intro. And I think that applies to most things where these kind of limitations of keeping it simple always make you distill your idea and deliver it in a way that is kind of easier to get the click and to kind of take in and deal with. I don't know. There's just overall for me, it feels like a game. It's a toy. It's a thing that you play.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just to that simplicity for me, pixel art is where it's at. It's what opens up that box for me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just felt right to tell the story in that way because visually it's in continuity of what you can expect, with the rest of it.
What's harder to make, the 2D platformer Metroidvania or the party-based, turn-based RPG?
Oh boy. Well, so it depends what you mean by harder. It was certainly a lot more work. It was 4 times, and that's not speaking to playtime or anything, but it was 4 times the scope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Compared to Messenger, so 4 times the team size and 4 times the production time. So I don't know if that's 16 times the scope, but it was a lot more. You're making your 8-bit platformer, and it's like your character, your enemy, you take one monster, walks in 2 frames and only one angle, and you flip that if they go left. You do the same thing in Sea of Stars. Well, the walk cycle is 6 to 8 frames, and you've got 8 angles instead of just two, right? So you do 5 because you can still flip, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, just one enemy just went from 2 frames to
That many
to, I don't
movements.
know, around like 32 frames, I suppose, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that equivalence is everywhere in everything that we touch for the game. There's the equivalent of from this to that in terms of complexity.
Uh, Sea of Stars, multi-platform, coming to a lot of different places. Jam Pack Sam wrote in and said, "What was the biggest hurdle, if any, in bringing the game to Xbox?" If he remembers correctly, there was this was kind of up in the air, and people weren't sure if it was going to come to Xbox at launch. Is that right?
Oh.
Were there actually hurdles, or is that anecdotal?
Well, so at first, so when we did the Kickstarter, what we said was it's a game for PC and console. That's and for us, and I mean, we live and learn. What we meant by that is that's not an iPad game.
Right.
For us, it meant like, no, this is a fully fledged, like premium title that you buy and that you play through with a controller, and it's not. There's no gotcha in there. There's no, we're telling you a fully blown story with like dungeons and upgrades and new characters. We're making, and so that was the biggest reason behind saying that. Is picture yourself like on the couch with a controller playing this. And then it was a matter of looking where the interest was for it, which at first was overwhelmingly on the Switch. And so we chose to tackle that one first. And being a fairly small team, any time you spend porting is time you don't spend, working on the game, finishing up the game, polishing up the game, and there can be a lot of curveballs during production. And so we basically were listening to what people were wanting, were expecting, where for it to be released, and we basically just went in order of priority, and we were able to chuck everything in for launch is what happened because it went smoothly enough. Um, the thing about Xbox is one thing that happened is that and that's totally honest. I'm not blaming the internet, but from that messaging of PC and console, people kind of they said they would do Xbox, and it's like, hey, we said we would do console. We never said that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's understood that it can be understood like this. But anyway, it's all good in the end because we are doing it, and we always wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't clear that we would be able to hit all platforms for launch. So, but we're glad that we were able to do it. We actually got some backup from our friends at the Berserk Studio. I don't know if you know Infernax and Just Shapes and Beats. And
yes, we've had is it Scott Brody? No, that's not Scott. We've had the Infernax team on before.
Right.
They've been
Okay.
on XCP.
Great. And so basically, two of their team members. They're also based in Quebec City, and we've been friends for over a decade now. And so basically, they came in and they lent a hand to help like porting, and so essentially what that means is, we can do everything now, because otherwise we would have had to limit ourselves to probably Switch and PC for launch.
Gotcha. That makes sense given the market size and interest levels. Mike Ducarme was the one that was on.
Oh, right. Yeah, Mike, of course.
That's cool. Look at that. Crossing paths. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's cool. So a question that I often ask developers, particularly those that are working on titles that have generated interest, right? Sometimes indie projects are very quiet in the winds and they release and then people find out about them. Other times they've got a pedigree. Without trying to put pressure on you, The Messenger is very highly regarded. Sea of Stars highly anticipated. Is there pressure to hit a certain price point, to be on a platform service, Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, Epic Game Store, whatever? Is there pressure to release a certain way now, or do you feel like you've got freedom to choose what you think is right for the game?
Right. Well, so the main thing that was for us, like this is more outside Xbox conversation, but you spoke to the Epic example. That's something we didn't want to look into. Kind of having people back your project, and then you're like, hey, we're not gonna be on Steam at launch, which is like the main platform to be.
Right.
And then you get review bomb because you ask for help, and then you took the check, and and it's like it's just a whole conversation. As entertainment providers,
Sure.
it's just more comfortable for everyone to keep the realities of the costs and of how we stay afloat as a company to
Hmm.
provide more entertainment in the future, just to get as much as possible of that out of the way. So we're not against subscription catalogs if the offer is there, if people want, because for us that's more people playing our game, right?
Hmm.
Um, but we didn't want any exclusivity.
Gotcha.
So if for example, working with Switch, we got some pretty cool opportunities. We were in a Nintendo Direct, which is a pretty huge. But if it came with a thing of they don't do that at all. But if it was a thing of but you can't launch on this other platform for 6 months out or whatever, we would have said no, because we don't want to leave people out. And like the reason being, we made a decision, for our own pocket or whatever. It's
Right.
really like if we're not doing a platform at launch, it's just like, look, we're getting to all of you in order of interest, and there was just no time and no budget left, but we will get to it as soon as we can afford it. And
Hmm.
now it happens that we can afford to do all of them for launch, which is great, and it's the dream scenario, to be honest. Um, but yeah, to bring it back to your question, if there is pressure on the way to release it, for us, we don't, in the same way that we don't do a market research like, oh, is there a demand for a Pixel Ninja platformer? The answer is no. We still made one
Hmm.
because that's what at heart we genuinely fully felt like doing. And if people see like the love that we put in there, they should gather around it. And it was the same process for doing a turn-based RPG. It wasn't like, oh, is there a JRPG resurgence right now? Whatever. It was just like, no, this is what we genuinely care to make. And so then, in terms of releasing it, when looking at, for example, the cost of the game, we're looking at what we have. We're looking at what's out there in terms of a pixel art turn-based RPG, and we feel that the quality is on par with the big titles that we can buy and look at and see on the store. But we're not gonna have a price point like, I mean, we're not Square Enix, and we
Hmm.
know this. But also, you can't go too low because you also need people to understand that they're buying into both quality and quantity here. It's not a 5 hour thing that's only text based or whatever. It is a fully fledged game that we spent almost 5 years making. So, but I think we'll be in a good place, in a fair place. We didn't like specifically define it yet, but it will be the offer that we can afford, while keeping in mind that we want to make a third game after that.
As we kind of close out, you want to make a third game after that, set the same universe, something
Oh yeah.
different, set the same.
Uh, well, I can't really speak to what that game might be or
No,
look
tell
like,
me
but
everything. Tell me everything. Spill it all.
Spill the beans. No, but so two things we're committed to is pixel art, and yeah, all the games being in the same universe. That's for sure. And so there is, as we kind of make our games, you can see some connections between them. And then as we're telling an arc, you can kind of have maybe this grander like timeline in mind if you care about all of our games. Like we have some people in Discord who are like mapping all of this, and so yeah, we leave some doors open, for things to tell later, and then we explain something from another game in the next one. It's not to a point where you can't play this if you haven't played the previous one. It's more like if you're in the know, you'll get a tiny bit of extra value.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, Thierry, I'm so excited for Sea of Stars to arrive in August. It feels, and several people wrote in just saying that they wanted you to know how much they're looking forward to the game's release.
Oh,
That they are ready for August to get here even faster, which I thought was really, really cool. It's a good
oh, that's
thing.
great. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. Let people know where they should go to find out more about Sea of Stars, and if there's anything they should look forward to in the short term.
Yeah, well, so there's on Discord, we're Sabotage Studio. That's really the main point. We answer questions there directly. Our community is pretty engaged, and if you want to get into understanding what happened before, where things are going, we had a bit of an ARG going on for a while, and so I would say that's the place. Otherwise, we're on the just Sea of Stars is on Twitter. We post all the news there as we go. It's also a good place to follow if you prefer more of a feed. We have like a weekly post. We always every Friday we post like a short bit from the game or talk about a system. So that's another good place. And yeah, that's probably the top two I would say if you want to get more involved as we ramp up to the launch. It's kind of unbelievable to be saying that, but yeah, here we are.
Here we are, man. Well, excited to follow that one. Of course, we'll be checking in soon. And you and I are going to have to talk again come third game.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Complete our trilogy for that one. So, listeners, remember you can support us over on Patreon and, of course, follow us here for more developer interviews. Thierry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks again, Luke. It's always a pleasure.